How does a U.S. Navy sailor facing food shortages on an aircraft carrier end up dictating the price of your groceries?
It's a wild connection, honestly.
Right. Today, we're looking at a stack of sources from late August 2026. We've got financial reports, geopolitical announcements, military updates, and at first glance, they seem completely disconnected.
Really random events, yeah.
But once you start peeling back the layers, you realize they are just entirely intertwined. I mean, we have a $40 trillion mountain of U.S. national debt, a massive new economic offensive against Iran, and weary sailors on a long-deployed aircraft carrier.
It's a lot to process.
It is. So, our mission for today's deep dive is to untangle this web for you, to figure out how these seemingly random events are actually driving a single global narrative. Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah, it's a profound web to untangle, for sure. Because what this deep dive is really about when you look at the underlying currents is the absolute limit of American
About
power.
limits of it, yeah.
Exactly. We are witnessing a superpower hitting the boundaries of both its financial leverage and its military endurance. And what the sources reveal is how those limits are forcing this frantic, almost real-time shift in global strategy.
Kind of like scrambling to adjust.
Right. It's an exercise in watching a nation try to figure out what to do when its traditional tools are suddenly, well, just too heavy to lift.
Wow. Well, let's start right at the foundation of that power, which is the U.S. economy, which, according to the financial reporting in our stack, is standing on some seriously shaky ground right now.
Very shaky, yeah.
We have Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent trying to manage this staggering $32 to $40 trillion treasury market. And his big move, he announced an intervention to ease pressure on longer-dated government debt.
Right, the buyback plan.
Exactly. The plan is to basically buy back those securities, potentially more than $4 billion per issue. And Bessent is publicly telling allies that the U.S. can just, grow our way out of this mountain of debt.
Which is quite the claim.
Yeah. But the market reaction to this intervention was absolutely brutal. Bond yields climbed right back up, erasing the pullback from the previous day.
They did, yeah.
I need you to pause here for a second, because the relationship between bond yields, government buybacks, and market panic, it always trips me up.
It's strange.
What is the actual lever being pulled here?
Well, it is a counterintuitive mechanism, so it's worth breaking down. Usually when the government steps in as a buyer for its own bonds, the increased demand drives the price of those bonds up.
Okay, higher demand, higher price.
Right. And because bond prices and yields move in opposite directions, the yield or the interest rate the government has to pay out should theoretically go down.
Oh, I see.
That is what the Treasury intended. They wanted to lower the yields to make borrowing cheaper.
But that's not what happened, right?
Not at all. Investors didn't see a comforting intervention. They looked at a $40 trillion debt pile and saw a government desperately trying to artificially prop up its own debt.
So it spooked them. They realized the underlying fundamentals hadn't changed, just the optics.
Precisely. The market realized that if the government is printing or allocating billions to buy its own debt, that injects more cash into the system.
And more cash floating around.
Fans the flames of inflation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So investors demanded higher yields to compensate for the risk that their money will be worth less tomorrow.
That makes sense.
And when bond yields spike, borrowing becomes incredibly expensive for everyone, from corporations looking to expand to consumers looking for a mortgage.
So stocks become way less attractive.
Right. Consequently, we saw Wall Street's main indices tumble. I mean, the Dow Jones plummeted over 700 points in a single afternoon.
Wow. And it's not just the bond market causing this anxiety. The sources highlight a whole cocktail of inflation fears driving this sell-off.
Oh, absolutely.
We have rallying oil prices, disappointing consumer sector results from Walmart, and soaring grain prices. Analysts are literally calling the grain situation a global food supply perfect storm for this winter. That perfect storm phrasing is critical, I think, because it highlights how multiple variables are breaking down simultaneously.
Right.
You have supply chain disruptions hitting grain, energy costs hitting logistics, and consumer spending contracting as everyday items just become too expensive.
Which brings us to a really stark contrast between the political messaging and the actual economic reality on the ground.
Oh, the disconnect is massive.
Yeah. President Trump is out there playing down the bond fears and actively pushing for interest rate cuts to stimulate the economy. But at the exact same time, Federal Reserve officials are warning that a rate hike might actually be needed if this inflation doesn't cool down.
It's totally contradictory.
And meanwhile, small businesses are feeling a very different kind of pinch. We have a report showing the Trump administration is withholding nearly $289 million in congressionally appropriated Main Street loans.
Over what they're calling a war on woke.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And regardless of the politics behind it, that is hundreds of millions of dollars of liquidity suddenly vanishing for small business owners who are already struggling with high inflation.
It creates a fascinating duality. You have macroeconomic instability at the highest levels with the national debt, and very tangible credit freezes happening at the bottom on Main Street.
Squeezes everywhere.
Yeah, and the central tension is that political timelines demand immediate growth and optimism, while economic realities demand painful contraction and caution.
Well, I want to make sure we're fully wrapping our heads around Bessent's bond buyback strategy. Wall Street investors and the sources called it a Band-Aid on a bullet hole.
A very grim analogy.
Yeah, and some analysts, like J.P. Morgan Sullivan, even compared it to paying your mortgage with your credit card.
Which never ends well.
No. But honestly, it feels more like trying to cool down a hothouse by leaving the refrigerator door open.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
Right. Like, sure, it might feel cool if you stand right in front of it for a second, but the motor has to work twice as hard, and ultimately you are just pumping more heat into the entire system.
That is an incredibly apt analogy. The refrigerator motor in this scenario is the core inflation rate. You cannot engineer a quick fix for $40 trillion of debt when the underlying inflationary fires are still smoldering.
It just makes it worse.
Every attempt to artificially cool the room just overheats the engine further.
But that inflation fear on Wall Street doesn't just come from domestic debt management, right?
Yeah.
It's being actively fueled by what the administration is doing abroad.
Yes, the geopolitical pivot.
The sources show a sweeping pivot from defending the economy at home to aggressively weaponizing it overseas. President Trump just announced what he is calling the most crushing economic operation ever taken against any country.
Against Iran.
Yes, he's explicitly labeling it an economic D-Day against Iran, with the stated goal of total economic collapse for Tehran.
This represents a monumental escalation in financial warfare. The strategy outlined in the sources doesn't just rely on primary sanctions, which simply forbid American companies from doing business with Iran.
They're going further.
Much further. They are utilizing extreme secondary sanctions.
Walk us through how a secondary sanction actually functions in the real world. I think people get primary and secondary confused.
Sure. A secondary sanction means the United States leverages the dominance of the U.S. dollar to dictate global trade.
Okay.
They are telling any foreign entity, so a shipping company in Dubai, a bank in Europe, a front company in Asia, that if you provide a lifeline to Iran, you will be locked out of the American financial system entirely.
Wow. So it's an ultimatum.
Exactly. It forces global businesses into a binary choice. You can trade with Iran or you can trade with the United States. You cannot do both.
And Secretary Bessent made that incredibly clear. He told allies, you're either with us or against us.
The messaging is not subtle.
No, not at all. He argued that applying this maximum economic pressure likely means the U.S. won't have to restart large-scale kinetic combat.
Meaning boots on the ground, dropping bombs.
Right, the traditional physical warfare. Vice President J.D. Vance echoed this too, calling the economic pressure a delicate dance, but insisting it's the most effective tool they possess.
And we are seeing the real-world squeeze happen immediately.
We really are. The sources show the U.S. leaning heavily on Dubai as one of Iran's biggest economic lifelines. The United Arab Emirates has completely suspended all trade with Iran after coming under renewed missile fire.
That UAE embargo isolates Iran significantly. But you have to look at the broader mechanism of what the U.S. is attempting here.
What do you mean?
They want to turn the Iranian currency to dust and shut down their military factories purely through financial strangulation. They want to bypass the need for physical conflict entirely.
Well, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the side effects of this so-called delicate dance. On one hand, you have Secretary Bessent expressing confusion over a sudden spike in oil prices. He publicly stated he didn't really understand it.
Right.
But then we have a report from the Telegraph detailing a massive U.S. stealth operation actively taking 10 million barrels of oil a day out of the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is a staggering amount of oil.
It's roughly half the volume transported before the Iran war started. So my question is, how can the Treasury Secretary be puzzled by a sudden spike in oil prices when the U.S. military is actively having the oil flow from one of the most critical energy choke points on the planet.
What's fascinating here is the complete disconnect between the silos of government.
Right.
You have the military and intelligence apparatus executing an extensive physical blockade to choke Iran's revenue, and then you have the financial apparatus dealing with the economic fallout, seemingly without communication.
That's wild.
The global oil market operates on a razor's edge of supply and demand. When you pull 10 million barrels of oil a day off the market, prices are going to rally violently. It is an unavoidable mathematical reality.
And this brings us right back to the beginning of our discussion.
Exactly. When oil prices rally, everyday goods cost more to transport. Inflation fears spike.
And when inflation fears spike, the bond market panics.
The geopolitical weapon the administration is deploying in the Middle East is directly causing the domestic economic bleeding they are trying to stop in Washington. It is a closed-loop system.
That is a staggering feedback loop, which raises the obvious question, right? If this financial warfare is actively hurting the U.S. domestic economy, why is the administration leaning so heavily into this economic D-Day?
Why not use other tools?
Right, why this absolute reliance on secondary sanctions right now? Well, the military updates in our stack of sources paint a very stark picture. The physical military and intelligence apparatus, the traditional hard power, is severely strained.
It's exhausted.
We have the USS Abraham Lincoln finally heading home to San Diego. This crew just finished a grueling marathon 9-month deployment in the Middle East that involved actual combat in the Iran war.
9 months at sea in an active combat zone takes an extraordinary toll on both human beings and machinery.
It's got to be brutal.
They are being replaced by the USS George Washington, but the reports coming off the Lincoln are deeply concerning. Because they went months without a port stop, troops were reporting fresh food shortages and plumbing failures.
That is unacceptable.
And there are widespread allegations of a mental health crisis among the crew members. The situation became so acute that U.S. Central Command Admiral Brad Cooper visited the ship in person.
Wow.
He admitted that the deployment was uniquely challenging and acknowledged the severe stressors the crew faced.
It sounds like running a marathon, but every time you reach the finish line, someone tells you to run another 10 miles without giving you any water.
Exactly.
Eventually, the human body just shuts down. And it's not just the personnel on the ships. The sources show the U.S. war against Iran has deeply drained vital missile interceptor stockpiles.
The physical munitions.
Yeah, it's gotten to the point where allied nations are actively questioning if America still has the physical capacity to sustain multi-front conflicts.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the pivot to economic D-Day starts to look less like a purely strategic masterstroke of diplomacy and much more like a tactical necessity.
A forced move.
Right. The hard power stockpiles, the actual physical missiles required for kinetic combat are tapped out. That the human capital is exhausted. The U.S. is fighting with its wallet because its fists are bruised and broken.
And this institutional fatigue is spreading across the entire security apparatus, not just the Navy.
Right.
The Army is reportedly planning to phase out a drone battalion that was tasked just last year with studying drone warfare lessons from the Ukraine war.
Which is baffling.
It seems bizarre to cut a program studying the future of warfare just to save resources. And then there's the CIA. The reporting indicates an unprecedented staff exodus at the agency.
A mass departure.
Current and former officials say the pace of retirements and resignations is outstripping anything in recent memory.
The structural breakdown there is particularly alarming. Because of cutbacks at the Office of Personnel Management, these former spies are waiting months just to get their first pension checks.
That is insane to me. You literally have the people who ran the global intelligence apparatus waiting months to get their benefits cleared.
Right.
The bureaucracy is so backlogged, it can't even process the paperwork for the people leaving the building.
When your sailors are dealing with food shortages, your missile stockpiles are drained, and your intelligence officers are quitting in droves and can't even get their pensions processed, you simply do not have the institutional capacity to launch a new, large-scale kinetic war.
You just can't do it.
You have to rely on economic warfare. You have to hope the Treasury Department can apply the pressure that the Pentagon is currently too exhausted to deliver.
But while the U.S. is locked in this exhausting, complex dance of managing $40 trillion debt, policing the Strait of Hormuz, and trying to keep the lights on at the CIA, the rest of the world isn't waiting around.
Not at all.
There are massive wildcards in play that the administration has to field simultaneously. Let's look at the geopolitical side. President Trump casually announced he expects to meet with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un later this year.
Just threw that out there.
Yeah, and during that announcement, he offered an updated assessment of Pyongyang's arsenal, noting they hold 57 very powerful nuclear weapons.
The reaction to that announcement was immediate and chaotic.
Oh, completely.
Almost as soon as the words were spoken, South Korea and Japan reported that North Korea test-fired several short-range ballistic missiles.
Just immediately firing missiles.
Yes. The Japanese prime minister had to issue formal instructions to ensure the safety of commercial aircraft and maritime vessels. And to top it off, Kim Jong-un's sister released a statement claiming she was completely unaware of any impending talks with Trump.
Why do they react this way?
Yeah.
It feels like geopolitical whiplash. The U.S. extends a rhetorical olive branch, and North Korea immediately fires missiles and issues denials.
It is a very calculated move in the attention economy of geopolitics.
How so?
Well, North Korea understands leverage. When they see the United States distracted by inflation, debt, and a shadow war in the Middle East, they realize American bandwidth is stretched thin.
Oh, I see.
Firing missiles and denying diplomatic talks is a way of forcing themselves to the top of the priority list, ensuring that when they do negotiate, they are negotiating from a position of perceived strength and unpredictability.
It's fascinating. You have this very 1950s-style geopolitical theater test, firing ballistic missiles into the ocean and talking about nuclear arsenals.
Right, very analog.
But on the exact same day, in the exact same stack of sources, we see the domestic tech sector moving at absolute warp speed into the future.
A total contrast.
We have an AI startup called Anthropic, founded just in 2021 by former OpenAI executives. Following a $65 billion funding round, their valuation has exploded to $965 billion.
Which is almost $1 trillion.
Nearly $1 trillion. And there's talk they might file for an IPO this month.
This raises an important question about the true nature and location of power in 2026. Think about the stark contrast we are analyzing today.
It's pretty wild.
You have traditional nation-states bogged down in legacy problems. The U.S. government is staggering under $40 trillion in debt, struggling to figure out how to buy back its own bonds, fighting to keep physical supply lines open in the Middle East, and failing to process pensions for its own retirees.
It sounds so broken when you list it out like that.
Right. Meanwhile, in the private sector, a 5-year-old software company focused on artificial intelligence is suddenly worth nearly $1 trillion, entirely unburdened by those legacy physical constraints.
And the government is trying to keep a leash on this hyper-agile tech sector, but it feels like they are severely outpaced.
They're playing catch-up.
The Federal Trade Commission is out there issuing warnings to companies about personalized pricing. They are warning businesses that if they use consumer data to set different prices based on a shopper's propensity to pay, they might be breaking the law.
The mechanism of personalized pricing is a perfect example of this technological leap.
How does it actually work?
It means an algorithm looks at your browser history, your location, your past purchases, and determines exactly how much you specifically are willing to pay for a product.
That feels so invasive.
It is. 2 people could look at the exact same bag of coffee online at the exact same time and see 2 entirely different prices.
It's wild to think about algorithms dynamically changing the price of your groceries based on your personal data footprint, while the government is simultaneously dealing with global food supply panics because grain ships can't move freely.
It highlights the sheer bandwidth required to govern a modern superpower.
You really have to do it all.
The state is trying to manage a volatile nuclear-armed North Korea, execute a complex economic blockade in the Middle East, and simultaneously figure out how to stop private AI algorithms from invisibly price-gouging citizens.
The contrast is jarring.
The agility of the private tech sector, compared to the sluggish, bogged-down nature of state institutions, is one of the most defining tensions revealed in these sources.
So what does this all mean? When we look at this entire web of events, how do we synthesize this for you, the listener?
The through line here is the immense difficulty of managing a deeply interconnected world when traditional tools begin to fail.
Right.
We are witnessing the United States attempting a historic and perilous balancing act. They are trying to manage a $40 trillion debt burden while deliberately shifting away from an exhausted, tapped-out military apparatus.
Moving from hard power to economic power.
Exactly. They are attempting to replace that physical hard power with unprecedented economic warfare, trying to crush adversaries through secondary sanctions and stealth blockades.
But there's a cost to that.
Huge cost. As they do that, those economic weapons create immediate blowback inflation, oil spikes, market panics that hit their own domestic economy.
It's a vicious cycle.
And all of this is happening while they try to field unpredictable geopolitical curveballs and regulate an artificial intelligence boom that is creating private companies with more functional wealth than many sovereign nations.
And that is exactly why this matters to you. Because it's easy to hear about the Strait of Hormuz or Treasury bond yields and think, that's high-level government stuff. That doesn't affect my daily life.
Right. It feels distant.
But as we've explored today, it absolutely dictates your daily life. When the U.S. pulls 10 million barrels of oil out of the Middle East to squeeze a foreign adversary, that directly dictates the price you pay at the gas pump on your way to work.
Every single day.
When the Treasury struggles to manage its debt and bond yield spike, that impacts the interest rate you get on your mortgage or your car loan. When grain prices soar globally due to geopolitical instability, your grocery bill goes up. You are the one who ultimately feels the economic ripples of this global maneuvering.
Everything is fundamentally connected. The geopolitical weapon becomes the domestic economic burden. The macro policy becomes the micro reality for the consumer.
It really is a web. And it leaves me with one final provocative thought for you to mull over today. We talked extensively about the physical exhaustion of the state. The Navy struggling to maintain its ships and feed its sailors, the CIA unable to process basic pension checks for its spies, the Treasury juggling unthinkable debt.
The sluggish reality of government.
Exactly. And then we looked at Anthropic, a private AI company suddenly valued at nearly $1 trillion, rich with liquid cash and operating with blistering speed. It makes you wonder. Are we rapidly approaching a near future where private tech giants possess more functional wealth, agility, and power to shape the daily reality of the world than the traditional nation-states that are supposedly meant to govern them?
It's a profound question. When the traditional state is running on empty, who steps in to fill the void?
Something to think about the next time you see a headline about the economy, or tech, or foreign policy. Remember that mountain of debt, and remember those weary sailors. The neat, isolated boxes don't exist anymore. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the sources today. We'll see you next time.